I'm Caleb Brooks with the AHSAA Radio Network. I'm at Montgomery Academy down here in Montgomery, Alabama, joined by head football coach Gary Nelson. And Coach, we were just talking a little bit for you guys. Y'all play an out-of-state team to start the year, and if you look around the state, you're one of the few that had some success against an out-of-state team. As a lot of teams around the state, just struggled week one, but you guys didn't struggle. Y'all went over and played what looked like great football to come out 50-14 and really dominate the game that the way you guys did. I mean, how pleased were you with your team and what you guys were able to do on Friday?
Well, Caleb, first of all, I really appreciate the acknowledgement of our success in what we call a border war. Getting a chance to go and play a team from out of state. That's something that we've been trying to do at MA. Really ever since my first or second year as an assistant coach here, we tried to get a game with a comparable private school from out of state. And we're finally able to pull that off with Brookstone last year. So last year they came over here. We made the return trip this year. And just such a great opportunity for our kids to get to play in that game against a really comparable school just across the Georgia line. And so, I think it's exciting for Alabama high school football to get to have those opportunities to play against teams from other states. And, we were certainly very fortunate to come out with a big win. We didn't really know what to expect going in. Brookstone was really good last year. We knew they graduated some key people, but you just never know because it's not like we cross them very often. We don't swap film and see them, every day like we do some teams in Alabama. So you really didn't know what to expect. And I was very pleased with our kids. Their effort was great. We had lost a lot of key people, and we had to have some folks step up, and they did that. So. I was really excited, and again, it was just a great atmosphere and a great opportunity to play.
This is year 4 for you as head football coach here. You'd been an assistant before. It's your first gig as the head guy and being the guy. And when you think back to taking over the job to now being in year 4, you just got it started last week. Where do you feel like yourself as a coach has really grown the most as a head coach? Since taking over that first day.
So I think the biggest opportunity that I've had to grow has been in terms of how we utilize the personnel that we have around us in terms of our coaching staff. I think that in my first year, I was pretty dead set on what my role was going to be on the staff. I was going to do certain things, and other people were going to do certain things. And the good news about that is that I got to do a lot of things I like to do.
Yeah.
But the bad news is I had people sometimes doing things that they weren't passionate about, and ultimately that they weren't, maybe weren't necessarily as gifted in or as capable in. And what we've been able to do now is we kind of take a look at, what are the gifts and the strengths of the coaching staff that we have and in place, and what can they do, and then I'm going to kind of adjust based off of that. And really that came to fruition last year. We started out 1-3. We weren't very good. At the time, I was in my first year as the athletic director, so I was the head football coach, the athletic director, and was also the play caller on offense. And what I found after starting 1-3 was that I didn't feel like I was devoting enough time to the game plan side of things. And we're fortunate to have a great coach on staff in Jeremy Arant. He took over play calling after 4 games, and I think that made a huge difference in our season because it allowed me to get back to coaching players rather than plays.
Yeah.
And that's something that I don't know if I would have had the maturity to do in year 1, sort of to admit that, hey, I'm part of the problem in our slow start here, and let me do something about it. So, I really think that it's things like that. Again, using the strength of our coaches. My first year I wanted to run every workout, and we've got a great strength and conditioning guy on staff, and it's really been about giving him the freedom and the autonomy, and that's Jacob King, who's also our defensive coordinator, does a great job. So it's really just letting those guys have some ownership over something and getting out of their way, and sometimes getting out of my own way. So, that's really been the biggest growth opportunity for me.
Yeah, and you see a lot of times, I think, with young guys like yourself that do take over, you're so used to being in that assistant role. You're used to having to do all this different stuff that when you do get the head job, it's different.
Sure.
Was it a lot different for you to have to kind of be able to step back and let your assistants do the work for you?
So I think yes and no. I was very fortunate here under Anthony McCall. My last several years as an assistant coach, he made me the associate head coach. And our structure at the time, he was our athletic director, our head football coach, and our head basketball coach. So what that meant was that I basically got to run the day-to-day operations of the football program. So when it came to becoming a head coach and formally taking over football, that transition was pretty smooth because Anthony had already sort of prepped me to do that, and he was still here as the AD, so he was 15 feet down the hallway if I had a question. And he was, such a mentor and someone who I just, owe so much of my career to. So that transition was easy. What was a little tougher for me was actually last year in assuming the athletic director role in addition to football, where, essentially you just triple the number of student athletes that, we're responsible for every day, and you have to, you have to be there for a lot of kids and a larger community, and you got to be there for all of them at once. And that's where I think some of the challenges hit me in terms of, it's not just about being a coach anymore. It's about being there for other coaches, being there for parents of other sports and whatever the case may be. And so that was something where I really had to take a step back and, utilize the people around me a little better. And ultimately, frankly, just swallow some pride and, and we always talk about sort of having 3 rules here that you want to humble yourself, govern your attitude, and do your job. And I had to make sure that I had that priority list checked off. And fortunately, I think I've learned a lot over the last couple of years, and I'm still learning about how best to fulfill this role.
How thankful are you to have had that opportunity, though, to kind of already, even though you weren't the head guy, basically be the head guy and run the operations, while your other coach was busy doing other stuff? Yeah,
it was vital. And that's something that if I could talk to a young coach and tell him, what do I need to do to advance my career, it's find somebody who's going to commit to mentoring you, to pouring into you, and that will give you those opportunities to take some ownership. But yet who is committed to being a safety net for you as you're taking that ownership. Because there were a lot of conversations where, I would have to be called in and corrected on something. And so that was just a great professional growth opportunity for me. And, again, I really think that, guys like me and you, our generation probably gets a little bad rap for being impatient and, not always wanting, what have you done for me lately? Mm-hmm. And I would really encourage people to, be around folks that invest in you, and let them do that, and that'll pay off in the long run.
Being here, obviously a private school, so numbers are different. You guys have to basically play up a classification.
Sure.
Does that make it more difficult, or is it just something that you guys say, well, we have to deal with it, and so let's just deal with it and play who we have to play?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, first of all, I think it probably is a little more difficult. But what I think is that, with every difficulty, there's an opportunity. And so if our difficulty is that we have to play against larger schools, to me, that just means that we have to commit a little harder to, recruiting our hallways and making sure that we are offering a program that our kids want to be a part of. And we've actually grown our numbers a little bit this year by just being positive and building relationships with kids in our school community. So to me, I think it's a challenge for all coaches right now to make sure that their numbers stay where they are. Just given the change in kids, the change in culture, the change in the way football is perceived, we've all got to do a little bit better job of making our game more attractive. So I think things like the multiplier just make us have to work a little harder at doing that. And that ultimately makes us a stronger program. So in some sense, I'm appreciative of that. And I think in terms of, relative to the other teams that we play, you play who's on the schedule. Yeah. And, there's no guarantee. We were 2A in 2012 and 2013. We played really good 2A teams. We were in a very competitive 2A region. We move up to 3A. Some years our 3A region has been really competitive. Some years it hasn't been as much. But I think that, at the end of the day, again, it's about doing what you can to take care of yourself and to compete as hard as possible against whoever's on your schedule as far as in the region. So I think you got to be careful of, trying to look at that multiplier and things like that as an excuse.
Montgomery Academy just, in pretty much every sport is good. I mean, you don't look and really find a sport where you go, well, they're just not as good in that one. You look at boys and girls soccer and what they've done, volleyball, what they've been able to do, baseball, as good as they are. Do you feel like, with every sport here being as good as they are, that helps every sport? I mean, do you feel like it feeds into the next sport and just keeps going?
I do, and I would take it a step further in that, it's not just that we've had success with our athletic department. So many of our kids in our upper school are multi-sport athletes. They're involved in student life. They're involved in the arts. And I think that the success that they're around in avenues other than just athletics also contributes to that idea of just learning what it takes to be successful. So, an example of that would be our speech and debate program is one of the top nationally year in and year out. Our choral program, we're one of the few schools that probably has, there have been years where 4/5 of our offensive line is in the chorus. And I think that what that does is it gives our kids an opportunity to gain exposure to people that are successful for different reasons than just what their teammates and their coaches have instilled. And it really helps our kids find their own identity and their own path to success, which ultimately carries over back into athletics and does contribute to what they're able to accomplish. And I think the other thing that is true of the athletic department here is we've got some long-tenured coaches who have been a part of so many state championships and winning programs year in and year out. And I think what happens here is that coaches are able to learn from those who have come before them and who have been successful. And so I think the coaches have learned from that, and then that allows, by extension, the kids to learn to be a part of that. So MA, I appreciate you pointing out the athletic legacy here. But none of that happened by accident. That was through the commitment of, in the early days of Coach Joe Moody, and obviously now in what Julie Gordon and David Bethea have done, what Coach John Tatum did here in football forever. And it's really just about instilling that mindset that our kids get the opportunity to lean into that legacy that those coaches and former athletes have left.
ESPN released that documentary this past weekend about the history of football and why it was built. And one of the things they focused on was that when they designed the game, it was for whoever has the bigger, stronger guy is going to win the game. Well, when you're here, like we talked about, smaller school, you got less numbers, less depth against some of the teams that you're going against. Do you feel like you have to change your style of play and the way that, you have to coach these kids, the way that, your offense is going to be and your defense to match that? Sure,
absolutely. I think that's an important question, and I've got some friends around the state that I talk a lot of ball with, and one of the things we always talk about is that what you do has to reflect your skill set and your mindset. Is that you see a lot of coaches that are determined to be one thing, and sometimes that relative to the players they have probably isn't what they should be. And I feel like at this school we've really had to learn to tailor our schemes to the strength of our kids. We've never had, year in and year out, we look very different. Some years our skill guys can do certain things and our linemen can do certain things. And so really every year we retool to a degree to match the strengths of what we have. I think in 3 years ago, I think we probably ran the football 85% of the time. And then, last year we were slinging it all over the yard. Yeah. So you just kind of do whatever you can to be successful with what you have. And to me, that's a fun challenge. And that's something, I mentioned Coach Tatum. I talked to him about at length when he was the head football coach here for years and years. And, there were years where he was in the double wing. There were years he was in the I. Years he was doing some West Coast type stuff. And, I think sometimes you just have to, fit what you do to what you have, and that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and when you think of the great college coaches, it's guys that have done that, have adjusted, and the people talk about all the time, like Bear Bryant when he went to the wishbone, and that was the thing, and to make that move. And now, you look at Nick Saban in Alabama, and now they've gone spread because everybody else has. And,
Sure.
Good coaches, I think, adjust to what they have and adjust to what's going on at the time. So, at a place like this, like you talked about, 85% run a couple years ago, part of the reason you are throwing it around now is, you got a guy that we named Athlete of the Week,
Sure.
Britton Kahn, and having him at quarterback, he goes 15 of 21 last week, goes for over 200 total yards if you include his rushing, accounted for all your or for a lot of your touchdowns. I mean, to have a guy like that controlling your offense, running your offense, and being your quarterback, how much easier does that make your job and your coach's jobs and calling plays and getting you guys set up on that side of the ball?
Oh, no doubt. I mean, BK's got a lot of physical tools, and the thing I love about him is that he's just an MA guy. He was our ball boy when he was in 6th grade, and he was our middle school quarterback. He was our JV quarterback, and now it's his time to take over the reins and be our varsity quarterback. And he's such a coachable kid. He sat behind Trey Lindsey and learned a lot from him, and ever since really assuming the role of quarterback, he's just had such an appetite to try to learn to do it the right way, not just in terms of the X's and O's and the mechanics of being a quarterback, but he's wanted to learn to be a leader, to learn to be a guy that his teammates look to, and we talk a lot around here about how, people follow choices. And if you're going to take a role on a team that's a high-profile role that's considered to be a leadership role, then you have to be somebody who's known for their positive choices. And I'm just so proud of the way that Britton has stepped into that. He's assumed that role. He's taken ownership of it. And couldn't have been more happy with his debut than what we were.
This week for you guys, it's going to be a tough week.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big game for you guys, and it's one where you're playing a team that's kind of had you guys numbered
Sure.
a little bit. But you don't want to put too much emphasis on a game, but coming off last week, the success that you had, how important is it to kind of try to carry that momentum into this week and really build? We were talking about streaks. Last year, you guys were on both sides.
Sure.
You were on a losing streak, then you're on a big winning streak. How do you guys make sure that you build that winning streak and don't look back any and just really build momentum for this season?
Yeah, so I think that's a great point. You certainly, anytime you win a game early in the season, you hope that carries over and that you're able to have some success. But I do think it's important. I do think it's important to stop and take it 1 week at a time in terms of what it's really about is being the best version of yourself that you can be every single week. It just so happens that this week we've got to be the best version of ourselves against a top 10 4A team who has had a lot of success against us in the past. So I think, first of all, it's important to stop and acknowledge what a great program Coach Smith and staff have built at Hillcrest Evergreen. I think Coach Smith is one of the top coaches in the state, particularly at the small school level. Won a state championship there in 3A a couple years ago, moved up to 4, and has had a ton of success. They've got Mike Dean as the defensive coordinator there, and he's one of the most passionate, energetic coaches. I get excited just watching him, coaching across the sideline. It's just such a good staff over there. And I think, also when you combine that mix of coaching staff with the caliber of players they have, I think 4 of the top 100 recruits in the state go to Hillcrest Evergreen. So, it's really a mixture of great players, great coaches, great culture. Coach Smith and staff do a lot of things for those guys that extend beyond just football. So, I've got so much respect for what they do. So I do think it's important to pause for a second and just acknowledge that. And then I think shifting to, with that being said, what does that mean for us? Really how I started this is we've got to work to be the best version of ourselves that we can be this week. I think that we're going to have a good plan. I think it's going to come down to are we able to execute? And frankly, will we make the decision that every play we're willing to go compete with them? And, they kind of have some guys who are intimidating, frankly. And I think that's the biggest challenge for our kids is to understand that, you get the opportunity to go play against some of the best players at their position in this state. And you should view that as an opportunity that you should want to have the chance to execute. And so my hope for this week is that, we'll develop that mindset of just deciding that we want to compete regardless of who we're competing against. And so that's what we hope for.
Well, Coach, I appreciate you taking the time to
Absolutely.
sit down with me.
Thank you.
And thank you for letting me come here and visit with you. And, we look forward to seeing. It's a huge game for you guys.
Sure.
It's a big game, in this classification. And, we're just ready to see, how you two match up and how you can carry on the rest of the season.
Awesome. Thank you.